We've got a few people speaking, so on Teams, if there's more than one person speaking, it's really hard to hear who's speaking, audio cuts out, etc. So what we'll do is we'll keep people on mute unless they need to speak. If you want to speak, there's a couple of options. There's the chat function, which at the top of most Teams screens, there's a little speech bubble with a couple of lines in it. If you hover over it, it says show conversation. And if you click there, you'll see that there's people already been having a chat. I'll just put hi on it just to show there. There's a type a new message there. So if at any point you want to ask a question, please type it in there. And if you hit the paper aeroplane or submit or whatever it says on your screen, it should pop up for us. If you can't do that, you're not comfortable with doing that, or you'd rather actually speak, there's a little face with a hand above it. Looks kind of like this. And in there is a hand. If you click on that, you'll see there's a chance to raise your hand. If you do that, we'll see that you want to ask a question, and at a relevant point, we'll bring you in. We'll ask you to come in. And when we do that, you'll need to take yourself off mute. And to do that, there's a little picture of a microphone on your menu bar as well, an old-fashioned microphone. At the moment, it'll show it with a line through it because you're muted. But once we say, yeah, could you come on and say your piece, we'd ask you to unmute yourself, and then you would speak, and we will mute ourselves so that everybody can hear your question. I think that's all. So hopefully that works for everyone. If not, try and grab our attention by waving. Unfortunately, my Teams isn't working very well, so I can't see many people's videos to see who is speaking. But so I'm sure one of us will catch you waving and bring you in at appropriate time. Cheers. Judy, you're on mute.
Still muted. I'm so busy muting people. I muted myself as well. Sorry about that. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for coming along. I'm going to hand over to Claire now, who will start the proceedings and the welcome. Thank you, Claire.
Thanks, Judy. Good to see you as well. Good morning, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Claire Mellor and I'm the Deputy Director of Communities. I'm delighted to say that so many of you have been able to join us this morning at your autumn conference, and good to see so many of you here online. I think we had anticipated last year that we might have been meeting up in person this year at the Salutation Hotel. So let's hope that that will be the case for next year. It has been a challenging last 20 months for all of us, with the continued uncertainties that COVID-19 brought, and indeed the impact that this has had on our health, our well-being, our finances, and our ability to just generally meet each other and meet with family and friends. The way in which we delivered services to you has also had to change, and it changed overnight at the early start of last year. What has not changed, however, is our commitment to ensuring that all tenants are given the opportunity to participate and have your voices heard when it comes to the decisions that we make as your landlord. The rent level proposals which will be presented to you today reflect what you have told us were your priorities earlier this year. However, as in last year's rent setting proposals, some of the additional pressures being placed on our budget are, as you will understand, out with our control. Increased costs of materials, for example, and changes to our statutory requirements, particularly around and about the climate change, are facing us. We are, however, no different from any other local authority landlord in that respect. I really must stress that affordability is always and will continue to be a key priority when it comes to setting our rent levels here in Perth and Kinross. And as you know, we've got a really good, strong track record when it comes to this, both locally and indeed nationally. We are confident that the proposals here today will continue to see our rents remain as one of the most affordable locally, and that they will continue to compare favourably at a national level as well. I would like to now ask Councillor Braun, our Convener of Housing and Communities, to formally open your autumn conference. Thank you, Bob.
Okay, thank you, Claire, and good morning. And on behalf of Councillor Hearn, my Vice Convener, who will hopefully be joining us later, and myself, can we extend our own very warm welcome to all of you to this 2021 autumn conference. The importance of today's event in terms of working in partnership with you, our tenants, cannot be understated. It builds on the strong ethos of true consultation and engagement, which importantly must be, and most definitely is in Perth and Kinross, a two-way process. I hope you all have had a chance and the opportunity to view the pre-conference presentation, which provided you with an overview of how the rent setting process is developed in Perth and Kinross. I know we have several questions that have already been submitted, but as always, please feel free to ask any further questions as we move through today's session. Much work has been done by the officers here today to ensure that the priorities of you, our tenants, are met, whilst at the same time continuing to deliver an ambitious new build programme along with ongoing investment and improvements to your homes. The rent proposal options being presented to you today reflect all of these and seek to include an increase in resources to help tackle antisocial behaviour, an increase in investment in our planned maintenance programme, an increase in the financial support for tenants through the Tenancy Sustainment Fund, and an ongoing commitment to our buyback programme to increase our housing stock. It must be stressed that our council rent levels remain the most affordable of all local and neighbouring housing providers, and nationally we have the third lowest rent levels in Scotland. Our Affordability Toolkit allows us to consider the impact of any changes because of new rent levels and has been held as an example of good practice at a national event. It is important to us that we continue to ensure that we achieve that balance between delivering high quality services and affordability. Like all of us, the council is no different in that it experiences increases in the general costs of materials and delivering services. I appreciate that the last 20 months have been difficult for everyone, and our commitment to you to make sure we continue to provide wraparound support and maintain affordable rent levels will continue. Finally, and I often say this, and I'll make no apology for saying it again, I would like to publicly acknowledge the exceptional work done by all officers within the housing service under the most difficult circumstances presented by the pandemic and as we begin the process of recovery. I'm sure you would wish to join me in thanking them for all of their efforts in this time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Councillor Braun, and to Claire Mailer as well. So we're now going to move on to the main body of the presentation. So Kevin, if you could share the presentation, please. Okay, if you could move on to the second slide, please, Kevin. Okay, so thank you everyone for coming along today. And as I say, I would extend, a warm welcome on behalf of the housing management team for your attendance. And many of you will be aware that each year at this time, we come along to give an overview of our rent level proposals for the forthcoming year. It's the main discussion topic at this event, and of course, probably one of the most important for a number of reasons, not least of all, the level of rent reset and the rent levels that ultimately are agreed by Housing and Communities Committee affects each and every single one of our tenants. We understand that for those of you who attend this event on a regular basis, you will be familiar with how the rent setting process works. And for those of you who are new, it can seem that we are bombarding you with information and not, as you would say, cutting to the chase. We need to provide you with all this information each year to meet our requirements as a local authority social housing provider, to ensure that you're fully aware of the process and the legislation which sits around it, much of which was included in the pre-conference presentation. The screen and the table that is in front of you today outlines how we work our budget setting process. Many of the slides that I'm going to present to you today were in the pre-conference presentation, but we thought it would be worthwhile to cover these again so that if there were any further queries, then these could be raised with us today. The budget setting process starts with the consideration of the most important aspect, what our tenants' priorities were in terms of the rent setting priority survey that we sent out earlier this year and that we discussed at our June conference. This is then considered by the housing management team alongside service pressures that have been identified, and it's used to develop the housing revenue account spending priorities for the next 5 years. We consider the impacts of the pressures and savings against the housing revenue account business plan to assess both the short and long-term impacts and ensure the ongoing financial health of the service. These proposals are then considered by our senior management team before being presented to you today. Next slide, please, Kevin. So as I said, we always look at savings when we're looking at developing our rent setting proposals. And since 2016-17, the housing revenue account has made over £1.35 million worth of savings in the following areas: the transformation of our housing repair service at £500,000, general efficiencies in the way we work, £342,000, mobile working efficiencies, so allowing our staff to be able to work mobilely has resulted in just under £240,000, and additional income generation of £269,000. Next slide, please, Kevin. So in terms of this year, our proposed savings, as identified in this slide, are an increase in the level of income. So that for 2022-23, that increase in income is based on option 1 in the rent setting proposals that you're going to be presented with today. For the future years, so from 23-24 up to 26-27, it's based on our rent strategy, which we outlined in the pre-conference presentation, and that is based on a 2.2% increase, although the rent strategy is reviewed on an annual basis alongside our consultation and engagement with you, our tenants, as we're doing today. Okay, next slide. So what are the pressures? As you'll see, and as has been alluded to by both Claire and Councillor Braun, we are no different in that we're facing an increase in costs that are out with our control and remit. This table outlines what the pressures are on our budgets moving forward. The first line is an increase in staff costs. Staff costs are not something which the Council has control over. They are determined by our national terms and conditions, which still have to be agreed for this financial year coming. But what it does include is an increase in employers' national insurance contributions, which comes into effect from the 1st of April 2022. An adjustment to our bad and doubtful debt provision, and as I said, I covered this in the pre-conference presentation. Basically, that is directly attributable to and linked to our rent arrears levels, and we try to set our bad and doubtful debt provision within 5% of the total income that we're due to bring in. So basically, that increase is based on the fact that we will have an increase in our income level that we're due to generate, regardless of which of the options are chosen. Our movement in our loan charges is quite simply just changes to the level of payments that we have to make for our current and future borrowing levels. As we said, and we've talked about, we've got an increased cost of materials. We also have the requirement now for all our homes to have electrical inspection condition reports, so that's an additional budget pressure. We've got tackling climate change and zero carbon, a really important area as we move forward as a local authority, and we'll talk later in terms of the housing, in terms of the rent options, what that means in terms of increased resources, and Judy will talk to you about an exciting opportunity for tenants to be involved in helping us to shape this work moving forward. We've got increased costs for service and maintenance contracts. We've got an increased cost for the gas maintenance contract. We are proposing a one-off increase of £50,000 to our Tenancy Sustainment Fund to help support the most vulnerable of tenants who are continuing to experience financial hardship. And then we've got movement in our contribution to the capital projects. We are proposing a reduction, as I mentioned in the pre-conference presentation, but please be assured that will not impact, on any of our projects moving forward. I can see there's some of the chat. Could do, maybe come back to that later on, Gavin, if that's okay. Okay, if you can move on to the next slide, please. Okay, so in the first instance, what we want to go through is that some tenants, as well as paying a rent charge, they also pay a service charge, and that can either be for an optional service, so for example, the garden maintenance scheme, or can be for a compulsory service which comes with the building in which the individual lives. So these are our proposals for our service charges for tenants for 2022-23. So there's no proposed increase for the garden maintenance scheme, and there's a small increase in terms of retirement complexes of just over £6, just under £7 actually, in terms of the retirement complexes for the annual charge. I think it's important to stress and remind everyone that in terms of service charges, there is a requirement for the housing revenue account to make sure it gets the full cost recovery of the service. So that applies to owners within the multi-storey blocks, for example. Tenants' rent money shouldn't be subsidising services that are being provided to owner-occupiers. So in terms of the heating and lighting charges and proposals, as you'll see, all of these have reduced, apart from Isla Court, where there's a small increase. As I said, it's based on full cost recovery, and it's based on the cost of us delivering the service for the previous year. We do have some questions around the gas, etc., which we'll come on to at the end of this conference. Okay, next slide. So we wanted to stress that regardless of which of the options is taken forward or is voted for by tenants, the capital investment programme will continue, and that's guaranteed investment in the areas outlined. So central heating at 1.3 million, rewiring 3 million, windows and doors and triple glazing just under £250,000, kitchen upgrades of 4.5 million, external fabric of 6.7 million, and energy efficiency of 2.3 million. Okay, next slide. So what are the three rent option proposals? And again, we outlined these at the high level just on this slide in terms of the pre-conference presentation. So we have three proposals for you today. Option 1 is a 3% increase. Option 2, a 3.5% increase, and option 3, a 4% increase. But what we want to do today is take you through what that means in terms of service delivery for you as tenants, and also investment in your home. Go to the next slide, please. Right, I don't know if people are going to struggle to see that a wee bit. I know I am on my screen here, but I can make it bigger. So in terms of under all three of the options, tenants will see new and increased investment in service and maintenance costs to operate and maintain emergency lighting to communal areas across our stock, the Tenancy Sustainment Fund, as I mentioned earlier, covering the increased costs of buying stock for repairs and improvements, electrical inspection condition reports for each property, and additional staff to enable us to progress essential work to meet the climate change agenda. However, under each of the options, there are differing levels of other investment. Under option 1, 3%, we would also be proposing an additional £15 million over 5 years to buy back 30 ex-council properties per year. As you can see underneath option 1, the average weekly rent increase would be from £1.50 for a bedsit to £2.67 for a 4 bedrooms or larger. Under option 2, we would be proposing an additional £20 million over 5 years to buy back 40 ex-council properties per year. There'd be an additional £38,000 to enhance our approach to tackling antisocial behaviour in neighbourhoods. This was a key area that came out from the feedback from the rent setting priorities. and also an additional £170,000 to increase our programme of planned maintenance to include stairwell, close painting across our housing stock. Under this option, average weekly rent increases would go from £1.74 for a bedsit up to £3.11 for a 4-bedroomed or larger. Under option 3, a 4% increase, we would be proposing an additional £25 million over 5 years to buy back 50 ex-council properties, an additional £76,000 to enhance the approach to tackling antisocial behaviour, and again £170,000 to increase our programme of planned maintenance and stairwells, close painting across our housing stock. The average weekly rent increase would be from £2 for a bedsit up to £3.56 for a 4-bedroom plus. Go to the next slide, please. Over a number of years, Perth and Kinross has worked really hard to keep rent level increases to a minimum in partnerships with their tenants. This table shows you, in comparison with neighbouring authorities and the Scottish national average, our rents are the most affordable housing option in Perth and Kinross, and as you will see from later on in this presentation, are lower than other social housing providers in Perth and Kinross. You can see there from that table in terms of the average changes over the last 5 years. So we are sitting at the lowest as 8.2%, with the national average being 12.13% increase over the last 5 years. And we sit 2% under the nearest comparison, which is Stirling Council. The housing revenue account, however, does face general increase in costs in key areas of service delivery, particularly repairs and improvements. And this is due to an increase in our stock numbers through our successful new build and buyback programme, in turn meaning more properties become available for relet, requiring any necessary works to be completed. And our stock base is ageing, and the general cost of stock purchase and fuel costs have increased nationally. And all of this needs to be reflected in this year's rent level proposals to allow us to continue to meet our obligations as a landlord and to maintain current performance. It's of paramount importance to us that we make sure we strike a balance between service delivery and how affordable your rents are. Okay, next slide. The next slide shows you how, under each of the options, our rent levels would compare to our 3 neighbouring local authorities, so Dundee, Angus and Fife. We've provided an estimated average for those neighbouring local authorities, and we've compared that to each of our proposed options 1 to 3. You can see there that even under the highest option, we still compare favourably, with our average rent levels being 5% lower than our neighbouring local authorities. Okay, next slide. Thank you. What we also think it's important to do is look at the other real alternative housing options in Perth and Kinross, so other providers who provide social housing in the area. Again, we've estimated an average increase for each of these providers, and we've compared that again with our 3 options and proposals. And as you can see there, under the average rent levels, we're 17 or 18% lower, and in certain property types, we're up to 22% lower than real alternative housing options within Perth and Kinross. Okay, next slide, please. We mentioned earlier about our Affordability Toolkit. Many of you will remember that this was developed around 3 years ago, and we've continued to enhance it and listen to feedback from tenants around areas they would like to see us develop. When considering what is an affordable rent, there is no set calculation. However, the Housing Needs Demand Analysis estimates that it should be around 25% of an individual's available income being used to meet their housing costs. In reality, though, it ranges from between 25 to 30%, as shown in recent research. The table above shows for our 3 options what percentage of income an individual would have to dedicate to paying their rent. You can see there, minimum wage over 25, under all three options, it would be 23% of their income. Minimum wage over 21 would be 25%. Living wage would be 22%. And based on an average UK pension, it would be anything between 14 to 20%. All of these are well within or sit within the 25% housing needs demand analysis outcome. And you can see there the comparison of the neighbouring local authorities and registered social landlords. You can see there it ranges from anything from 23% up to 30% of their income, and that's before any anticipated increase in rent levels. We always think it's important to look at the percentage of residents who can afford a council rent in terms of our proposals. 84% of residents in Perth and Kinross can afford our rent levels without any additional assistance. So, for example, any assistance through either housing benefit or universal credit. And you can see that's 3% higher than for our local registered social landlords. Okay, go on to the next slide. So that's me. I can see I've been trying not to get distracted by all the chat that was on the side. I could hear the pinging, etc. So we may need to go back and look at questions. So I'll just.
I think Diana's been.
Hello, sorry, I've been typing away here in the background. A lot of the questions have already been answered, Michelle, so you might be pleased in that one. That's what all the pinging was about. June's been answering a couple of them, but I'll just recap them then. So a question from Gavin, who I think he's listening on at the moment on his mobile phone, so he's having a bit of issues with volume, I think, with the app. But to do with gardens, gardens, I'll just read it out. Gardens are in a mess. People are struggling to afford skip hire from private hire companies. Is there any chance that Perth and Kinross Council could cover the cost of skip hire for garden waste only? Whoever wants to answer that one.
I mean, we do have the garden waste, you know, obviously the recycling bins. We would need to come back to you on that one, Gavin. It's not something that at present we're considering, but, you know, we can take that on board and see if there is anything we can progress with that.
He also mentioned about a prize for top 3 gardens. Now, we did something similar to that probably 2 years ago, I think it was. We did the best gardens nominations at that time, which was interesting. But yeah, I think we'll come back to him on that one. The next question was from Derek, which June's answered, is which properties come under the EICRS, which is the Electrical Installation Condition Report. And June responded, all council housing stock comes under that, and it's refreshed a minimum of every 5 years or every new tenancy. And there was a follow-up question about if the tenant is in a property for 10 years, how's inspection carried out? And as June said, I don't know if she wants to elaborate on that, there's about to commence a 5-year contract.
Yes, morning. We're in the process of procuring that contract at the moment. I'm hopeful that will start on the ground towards the end of this month. And we should be in a position next week to be able to announce who the contractor is. We're actually still going through the legal procurement process at the moment. Many of our properties already have a current EICR, and this is a 5-year programme to ensure that these all stay up to date. We will also be required to report on the 31st of March next year, 2022. So we'll keep you well informed of that. We'll have information out on our website, social media, and we'll keep you all up to date in terms of what to expect. It's the same as doing an electrical condition report, installation report, is the same as doing an electric test. It's just checking and making sure that all the electrics within the property are kept up to date, up to standard, and that your homes are maintained in a safe manner. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks. Another question from David Seals. David, hi. Who does the council borrow from? Is there a local authority credit union where local authorities can have low interest rates as opposed to private sources?
Morning, I'll take this one, Diana.
Thank you.
The council tend to borrow through what's called the Public's Work Loan Board, which is a sort of cost-effective lending service to local authorities, and it's sort of managed. It's a separate company, and I think the majority of local authorities borrow their money through that, so it's not through private companies. We do have a treasury management section within our corporate finance within the council, so they always look at the borrowing requirements for the council as a whole, including the house and revenue account, and seek the best deals in terms of interest charges for the borrowing that we would incur through the house and revenue account. And I think the borrowing rate that we are incurring at the moment is quite good and quite low. So we receive the same borrowing rates as what they do within the general fund side of the council. So we attract the same rate across the board. So it is relatively competitive at the moment.
Thanks, Stephen. Another question that came up through the chat via Gerald on the phone. Sounds like something like we have Gerald on the phone, like a radio program or something. Gerald has asked about the gas supplier and security of this.
Yeah. So I think June, you were going to take this one.
Yes, the council has an energy officer, Steve Through, who deals with all these kinds of inquiries in terms of council properties, so council buildings. So in terms of the council buildings, we have a current supplier, which is Total Gas and Power, and we are part of a Scottish procurement arrangement whereby we purchase the gas or utility supplies at least a year in advance, and we get fixed prices for most of them that are slightly adjusted when the known prices are available. In terms of the supply for council buildings, the supply would not be stopped. There's not a risk of that. If the supplier was to go into liquidation or supply difficulties, the supply would be continued, and Ofgem would step in and make arrangements to move that supply to one of the larger utility companies. In terms of our void properties and our existing tenancies, they will remain with their existing suppliers at the moment. The thing that we can't do is there is a temporary ban on switching from one supplier to another. So if an existing tenancy or a void property is with a smaller supplier and there is a risk of that supplier going out of business, the same will occur as would occur with the major council properties, in that the supply would continue, Ofgem would step in and they would make a decision on which of the major suppliers would take over that provision. Our tenants, because of the current ban on switching, would not get a choice of which supplier they would go to. They would be told by Ofgem which company their supply was moving over to. So at the moment, we can't switch people around between different supply companies, but we have been reassured that no one will be left without a utility supply. We have a lot of information on the website. We've got signposting to the Citizens Advice Bureau, and they actually have quite a lot of information on their website as well in terms of the current situation with utility supplies and what you need to do if your supply is going to be changed to another supplier, and the information that it gives quite good tips in terms of taking photographs of your meter readings, etc. So I would certainly advise anybody to move over to that. In terms of the third issue is the supply to those multi-storey blocks that we have, where they have a supply charge included in their rent. Again, in agreement with yourselves and local members, we have an agreement to recover full costs in terms of the energy supplies. However, we do that a year. There is a delay of a year. So at the moment, the prices for the utility supplies will be based, next year's costs will be based on this year. There's at least a year of a delay in between the costs. So we still have a year or so to explore any impact, if there is any, in terms of energy costs as a result of what's going on in the industry at the moment. But there's no immediate risks that we can see that we need to be aware of at the moment. I don't know, maybe if Stephen or anyone else wants to add anything extra into that. Hopefully I've tried to make it as clear as I can.
Quite happy to come in. As June says, so the charges for 22-23 that are shown on the slide and that Michelle covered are actually based on the usage and the costs for the financial year 2021. So that was up until March 21. So it will be at least a couple of years until we potentially see the impact of any increase in energy prices coming through for us. But I think, as June explained earlier as well, that some of the gas and that is purchased in advance. So I think we do as much as we can as a council to minimise any future impact, and we will review the costs when we see any sort of changes come through as a result of increase in gas prices and electricity prices.
Thanks, Stephen. I see Lynn has got her hand up for asking a question, and then I'll come on to Gavin's. Are you there, Lynn?
Okay, yes. It's just occurring to me all these months and months when the council buildings, which we would normally go into, are closed. Has anybody considered that the rent, because we don't own the buildings, I don't think we do anyway. So has there been any reduction in the rent of, say, Puller House during the time that we can't use it?
I quite happily answer some of that, if that's okay, without knowing the full details. But we'll have an agreement with the owners of Puller House, and I think we're in a contract. I'm sure it's up in about 3 or 4 years' time. So I'm not sure if there is any reduction in terms of the rental costs coming through for Puller House, but in the main that is dealt with through the general fund side of the council, and no, I don't think there has been any decrease to rent because of the contract that we're in. So the HRA doesn't really see much of an impact on that. It will be part of the recharges that we receive from the council at the end of the year. So they certainly won't have increased, but there is no decrease to the rent there either, Lynn.
Can I just come in on that a little bit as well? Because Lynn, we certainly have continued. So Puller House, absolutely, we've had, significantly fewer staff there, but certainly the housing service on the ground floor, we have continued to sort of use the space that we use as a housing team. There's a few of our offices, obviously, that we haven't, I think, on the top floor, but because of the services that we provide, we have had some staff that are in. But I mean, I do think you raise a good point there in terms of, continued usage and ongoing usage, because certainly absolutely not to the extent that we did prior to COVID. Yes,
so with regard to the fact that when we're told that everybody, like that classic sentence now, everybody's working from home and the buildings are dark inside the front door, the buildings are dark and there's notices saying this building is not in use. That's not completely true, and some staff are still continuing to go to work. Is that correct?
We have got a number of staff, not a significant number, but we have got some staff for a variety of reasons that have to be at the office to undertake their role and to fulfil their work role. So some staff are operating there just maybe 1 or 2 days a week at most. So we've got, significantly fewer staff in, but we are using some of the space on an ongoing basis. But obviously Puller House isn't fully open. There are arrangements for people to attend, but it's not fully open as it normally would be.
If the COVID situation goes on and on and on for years and people get used to working mostly from home, could the contract with the owners of the building be adjusted so as to give us, if we can't use the buildings properly, to give us a reduction in the rent?
All of that, absolutely, Lynn. I think you raise a very, very good point there. And what we are looking at across the council is future ways of working. So the housing team are obviously included within that. We've identified very many benefits of home working, you know, being able to sort of, you know, connect with tenants, and indeed, you know, meetings that some of us would have attended out with Perth and Kinross, we can now do remotely. So there's many efficient ways of working in terms of home working, but also there are some real needs for some staff to return to the office, just even for team meetings and whatnot. So we will be looking at future ways of working, and they describe it almost as a blended or a hybrid model where people do some time at the office and some time at home. And that absolutely then will need to take into consideration in terms of the future use of all of our buildings across the estate, and indeed Pooler House, and then obviously what that might look like. So those will probably be discussions that we will have with you, not this year because we're not there yet, because we don't know what that will look like, but those will be discussions that we will have going forward, and the housing service obviously fits within the wider corporate service in that respect.
Okay, thank you.
So I've got a question leading on from that, about that subject, from David Seals. If council properties were empty, wouldn't there be a reduction in council tax, or do council service buildings have to pay council tax?
I think I've just put a response up to that, and Diana, yeah, just literally just now. If it's an office, then there's no council tax due. It'd be rates that we would be due to pay for the office, and if my understanding is, if we still have the building, then we're still liable for the rates charges, even though it may be sort of unoccupied at that present time.
Thank you.
Thanks. Sorry, I'm noticing a question from Derek earlier on. Is it only new builds that will have air source heat pumps installed?
Morning. Yes. June and I have already responded to that too. So we do have existing properties with air source heat pumps. And we also consider installation of air source heat pumps when we're looking at changing a tenant's heating system where it's come to the end of its useful life. So we try to look at those that have got solid fuel heating systems or the older type electric storage heating as alternatives for air source heat pumps.
Thanks, Nicola. I've got some questions that were submitted in advance of the conference. So one was, is the installation of smoke alarms in every room in the house by the middle of next year really feasible, considering the plethora of housing stock in the hands of the council? I think, Nicola, you're going to take that one.
Yes, thanks. Yeah, the legislation, just to clarify, the legislation, it means that it's an LD2 system that needs to go in. So it's not every room that needs an alarm fitted. It's an alarm that's in the kitchen and any escape route, which is a hall or on a landing, and in the principal habited room, which tends to be the living room in our properties. If we were to install an alarm in every room, it would be classed as an LD3 system, which is not what the regulations are asking for at this point in time. Not every address that we had needed to be included in the contract to have the installations done, because we had already been doing some of these LD2 systems in the heating contracts, which started in 2015. And also from 2020, any void property was upgraded with the new system to comply with the regulations, because we were aware that the changes were being introduced. They were actually delayed because of COVID. So at the time of us letting our contract, we had 3,774 properties that needed the work done. We did have some issues initially with procurement of a contractor, which caused some delays to the start date, but the contract that we've got running at the moment started on the 8th of March 2021, and we're currently on week 29, and there's approximately 48% of the installations have been completed, which is on average 62 installations a week. The contractor that we're working with is BRB Electrical Limited, and they've got 3 install teams who aim to complete 5 installs a day. We are currently on target for completion in March 2022. However, we are having some impacts felt because of no accesses to properties, even where the appointments have been arranged in advance. This might have an impact on us managing to complete, but we're trying to work through these, and 2 weeks ago there were 2 weeks set aside by BRB to do return visits and arrange alternative appointments with some of those tenants that had been no access previously. But on average, we've got about 17% of addresses with no access at the moment. We are working through these. We're trying to work with tenants and the tenant liaison officers that are carding properties and trying to work with the area offices to get some assistance. But we do have a process in place that if we get to 3 no accesses, that we will have to force an entry, which we really don't want to get to the stage of. So we're trying to work hard to not get to that stage. All of the installations are monitored by a clerk of works, and the progress of installations is reviewed on a weekly basis and is also discussed at a progress meeting on a monthly basis as well.
That's great, thanks, Nicola. Another question that came in is specific to, could there be improved soundproofing at Tramway Court? The traffic noise is 24 hours and is unbearable for the residents. What is the council's position for those who live next to busy roads? I think that's another one for you, Nicola, is it?
Yeah. Unfortunately, we've got many council properties that are located on or adjacent to a busy road. Tramway Court is a relatively new development, and normally as part of the planning application process, environmental health and roads are consulted as the statutory consultees in relation to whether or not they consider there's going to be any issues with the development, and that will include consideration of noise. Sometimes they do put on a planning requirement that adds such things such as looking at the position of the building on a site, so they may add specific noise control measures, which some of these are like acoustic trickle vents that they put into the window installations, but I'm not aware of any measures being requested at Tramway Court. All I can really suggest at the moment is if there are specific issues that are being encountered by the residents at Tramway Court, we need to raise that up with the area office, and then we can have a look at it. It may be that we need to get some noise monitoring done in conjunction with our colleagues in environmental health, so we can understand the level of noise that's being encountered before considering what measures we could install. I mean, just a question really, I don't know if anyone's considered the fact that the speed limit of 20 miles an hour that was introduced, has that had an impact on the properties as well? Because before, the traffic would have been travelling through at 30 miles an hour and would maybe, you know, be passed and not as noticeable. I don't know if the 20 mile an hour speed limits had an impact on that.
Okay, thanks, Nicola. Gina, see a question in there about reason people no access is because Gina said many times that our staff will wear gloves and clean down will happen, but this does not happen. And when you're raising it with the repair team, nothing gets done.
I don't know if that, Gavin, if that one was in relation to the comments that I made about no access for the smoke detectors, but that is something that we are keeping an eye on, and they do have a process for cleaning down before they leave the property, and all of the touch points that they've touched in relation to when they're doing the installation are cleaned down. We also ask that when we're working in a specific area that none of the tenants are in that area whilst the work is being done, and that is all explained in advance of us coming out, and questions are asked before we enter the property too. So I don't know if you've got specific comments with regards to BRB installations, but that is the process that we are following, and we're making checks on that with the clerks of works as well.
Gavin's, can I just come in there? Gavin's comment appears to relate to the repairs team trades, in-house trades. We've got an extremely robust risk assessment that was implemented with method statements and statement of operational procedures at the very beginning of the pandemic. We've reviewed that and updated that right throughout the whole pandemic as restrictions have changed. whilst restrictions for the most part were removed on the 26th of April this year, we have continued to have our guidance in terms of, or requirements in terms of PPE, and our need to wipe down properties before and after work, asking tenants to open windows and ventilate the property just before we arrive. So our trades teams are all very much aware of this. We've got monitoring regime in place where we go out and do unannounced audits of our trade staff while they're actually working. So if there is specific occasions when that happens, I would certainly want to be made aware of that, so that can be followed up with a member of staff. But we've got, as I say, fairly very robust processes in place so that this does not happen.
Thanks, June. Diana, is there any other questions?
No, I'm just looking at the chat. That was the last one. Judy's put on about the tramway court. We'll go back and look into that, Nicola, because you were asking as well about the 20-mile-an-hour speed limit. So we'll go and do some investigation on that one. Yeah, I'm just checking. No, that's all I seem to have at this moment in time. Is there anything more from the questions that were handed in? I think it was just the soundproofing, and there was a couple from Tommy, but Lynn's got her hand up as well.
Hi again. Earlier in the year, 1 or 2 times when workers came in, they mostly weren't wearing masks. So the mask wearing was getting, they come in with not wearing the mask, but I mean, I got used to it. I mean, I've not had COVID and I'm double jabbed now, but mask wearing, June, was even you get 1 or 2 of them will say something like, "Oh, I don't do that." So.
Lynn, I'm very sorry to hear that, and if you can give me an idea of roughly when that was, I can certainly look back to see what repairs were carried out in your property and whether it was our in-house trades or whether it was an external contractor. They absolutely should be wearing a mask and gloves, and they should be asking the streamlined COVID questions at the door from a 2-metre distance before they actually enter the property. But they should be wearing masks and a glove.
Yeah. Well, I got over it. I got over it. So I'm not prepared to say anybody's name because with regard to plumbing, I got a good job done in the end. So a new siphon was fitted in because I haven't had the new bathroom, and a new siphon was fitted in my toilet cistern, and it's fine now. So I wouldn't want to start to, name people now. But
well, thank you for highlighting it anyway. These processes are put in place for not only the safety of our tenants and households, but also the safety of our tradesmen. That process should be followed. They should be wearing the appropriate PPE. And following this morning's conference, what I'll do is I'll have a reminder email sent around all of our trade staff, reminding them that they should be continuing with that process, although they have already been reminded and they do all know that, I should say.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. Just so long as I don't want to get anybody into trouble, because when you've got a problem in your home and the repair centre is involved, and then if the workman does a good job, that's the main thing. I'm really pleased to have got a good job done. So I don't want to say names or anything like that.
No, that's okay, and I'm glad that you got a good job done. We just want to do a good job safely and avoid the risk of spread of any infections.
Thanks. I think it'd be either Michelle. I think Tommy's got his microphone off. There's a question from Tommy about why does have you got that one yet? Why does the council
not claim against any private owner when ingress of water from their flat causes damage to a tenant's flat? My understanding is that we would pursue this through our colleagues in our corporate insurance as part of the arrangements through that area of work. I think there was a further question from Tommy on what action can be imposed on residents who will not share the cleaning of a tenement. I think, you know, in terms of our tenants, in the first instance, we'd attempt to seek voluntary engagement with any tenant who's not maintaining any communal area for which they've got a responsibility. If this engagement isn't successful, then we will issue a formal warning letter to the individual that they are in breach of their tenancy agreement. If we have to arrange for the work to be undertaken ourselves, then that individual tenant will be recharged. Whilst it is a breach of tenancy agreement, and we could issue a notice of proceedings, if we're being upfront and honest, you know, there's not a sheriff court that's going to grant us a decree to evict a tenant for not cleaning a communal area. So that's the position. We will try and work with the tenant and the individual, see if there's any wraparound support that's needed or provided, or a reason behind why they're not maintaining the communal area, and pursue it down that route.
Okay, we've got a couple of hands up. Elizabeth Bradshaw got a hand up. Hi, Elizabeth.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'd like to come in on what has just been said about taking action against private owners who allow water ingress to other properties. It has been my personal experience after 5 such incidents that nobody is doing anything against a private landlord.
Can I just come in there? So if there's water ingress from, for example, a privately owned property down into a council property, what we do is we attend, obviously as an emergency. We will have a quick look at the electrics in the private property above to make sure that in terms of fire safety, these are safe and there's no risk of fire as a result. But we then pass the detail over to the council's insurance services to take up with the private owner, landlord, or insurance provider. So it's out with the housing service hands at that point. The detail all goes to the insurers, who are also involved in the damage and the cost of the damage to the council property below in those circumstances.
Does this always happen, June?
Yes, because if there is damage to our property, whether it's water, flooding or fire, we bring an insurance assessor in, and he surveys the damage and costs it, and then the insurance service deal with that thereafter.
No insurer has ever come to look at the damage to my bathroom and to my kitchen, though. Just the property inspector.
I can't speak about individual cases. I can, that is the process that we will follow.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, are there any other questions?
Can you actually hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Right. There seemed to be a contradiction here, because my ceiling came down and I phoned the council on 2 occasions. And what they said, oh, we don't bother with insurance. And I said, well, it's a private flat above, and I have tenants insurance as well. So I'm getting a sort of a different picture in what you are actually stating, Now, I've been left now for 3 months with just a board up to make sure nothing else sort of collapses from the ceiling, and had someone out recently who stated to me that you don't bother about insurance, that they will come as soon as time's available, which could be 3, 4, 5 months, I don't know. So there is a contradiction here, and I think it should be investigated. I mean, when I took tenants insurance out, I assumed at the end of the day, I have, I could then maybe probably claim. So I'm just sort of way in the dark about all these matters,
If I can come in there, there's 2 different things there, Tommy. In terms of your own tenants insurance, that covers your own personal household belongings and should also cover your decoration. So that you would be expected to claim through your own tenants insurance for your own household belongings. However, I think the earlier question was in relation to damage to the property itself, and certainly where there is a flood or a fire, the first port of call is to have a property inspector, repairs inspector out to have a look at that, to make an estimate of the costs involved, and then that's passed over to the insurance services, and the insurance assessor then comes out and looks at the damage, and it's then left with the insurance service to sort out between the private owner's insurance provider and the council's insurance provider.
Well, I don't want to reiterate too much, but that hasn't happened, and maybe somebody could look into it. I live in 11 Kearns Place. That's D House.
I've got that all noted down here, and I'll certainly look into that. In terms of there being a board left on your ceiling, it could be that that is in amongst some of our backlog of delayed work that's still to be followed up on, but I will look into that and see how we can get that progressed as soon as possible for you.
Right, thank you. Right.
Thanks, Tommy. Another general questions come in through the chat. Does the council help support a private tenant in terms of illegal rent levels or lack of repairs, for example? Sorry, or lack of repair service, for example?
That would be, it would be a mix. Obviously, our private sector housing team would be able to look at what support was needed for that individual, but we've also got our private rented accommodation officer, sorry, the private sector leasing, the officer that we would refer to where there was situations. We would also refer individuals, for example, to shelter or to the Citizens Advice Bureau in relation to difficulties they were having.
Thanks, Michelle. I think that's all the questions. That's all the questions from the chat. Lynn's got her hand up.
I'm just wondering, because I was at the TIS conference yesterday, you see the initiative Housing 2040. I wonder if the council or local authorities have contributed to that initiative, and whether council staff have been able to think of anything new, you know, to ask for to happen in the next 20 years.
Does anybody want to take that one? Housing to 2040?
I was just going to say, when I get to the bit about the new tenant climate change panel, we'll be looking at 2040, but I don't want to spoil the bit I'm going to say about it. But it is something we're looking at through the tenant climate change panel that we're going to be putting together.
Thanks, Judy.
I think Lynn and I had a chat about the tenant climate chat. Tenant is easy, hard to say. Tenant climate challenge panel. My goodness, try saying that fast. As Judy's going to talk about a little bit next as well, because we're looking for some volunteers.
Can I just quickly? Sorry, can I just quickly add? I'm not sure. In terms of the housing to 2040 and sort of all of its sort of wider issues, we are reviewing, Lynn, our local housing strategy next year. And all of these areas will be considered when we do that review of the strategy. So I'm not sure if that answers your specific question, which I think.
I just wonder if any member of staff is starting to think of, you know, wonderful new ideas which we could put forward that might happen in the next 20 years.
Yeah, right. So as we go forward and are reviewing the new local housing strategy next year, we will have a series of engagement events, which absolutely will involve yourselves, and we'd be really interested to have your input in that, Lynn. So yes, the answer is yes, and we will be looking forward to discussions with all of you in terms of supporting to shape the new local housing strategy going forward for next year. So absolutely yes, not for today, but lots of thoughts and ideas that we will have. Lots of new initiatives kind of at a national level, and we would be absolutely delighted and pleased to hear what your views are on these and what suggestions you might have. So I think there's some engagement sessions that will be planned. Norma, I don't think is here today, but Norma Robson from our strategic planning team and her team will be leading on that. So we'll be really interested to engaging with you. So probably early next year, we'll kickstart some of that work.
Okay. Thanks, Claire. Okay, so if there's no further questions, I'm conscious of the time. Does everyone want the next steps are in terms of the voting forms will obviously be sent out to all current and prospective tenants as we would normally do. They'll come out with your on the house edition. The voting outcomes will be included in a report to Housing and Communities Committee for approval, and that will be in January. And then all tenants, as you know, will be aware, we will be notifying you in writing of the outcome of the proposals. We are looking to increase the number of voting returns that we get this year, because, you know, the more tenants' voices that can be heard, then the better as far as we're concerned. So, as I say, look out for your surveys. Please encourage your neighbouring tenants, etc., to fill these in and return them to us. There'll also be an option to do this online as well. Can I thank you for your time today, and I hope you found the information interesting and informative. We were due to have a comfort break. I'm not sure how we do this by a show of hands, but I'm not sure whether everyone just wants to carry on with the final presentation or whether you would welcome a 10-minute comfort break. Any thoughts? Just go for it, David.
Just go for it.
Okay,
Yeah.
Others, I can see Elizabeth nodding. So I'm going to hand you over to Judy now, who is going to give you a short presentation on opportunities to participate in your housing services. So I'll hand over to Judy now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Michelle. I'm just parking Gerald in a place where he's safe, because I had him propped up on my laptop. Stay there, Gerald. Yeah, he's fine. Yeah, he's saying he's fine. I don't think you could hear him say that. There we go. Thank you very much, and thank you all for all your contributions. And it just proves how tenant and resident participation works, that you've all read your preview material and you've all come forward with questions, and that you've been so lively through this meeting. Thank you. So just in case you didn't know, what is tenant and resident participation? It's how, as it says in that slide, social landlords like ourselves manage our businesses so that tenants and other customers find it easy to participate. And what we say is, I'm going to be looking down and up, so I do apologise. I will be looking at you and then down and up, but we think that tenant and resident participation, if I could say it properly, tenant and resident participation even, aims to be representative of the needs and wants of Perth and Kinross tenants and service users. We think it gives tenants and service users the opportunity to engage with us with council services, and we think it offers wide opportunities for tenants and service users to exchange ideas, which we've been talking about today, share experiences, develop our networks, and make activities that work with council services, staff and yourselves. And that's why we've developed our menu of opportunities, which I'll talk about in the next slide. Before you change the slide, Kev, just wanted to point out that it is a very important outcome in the Scottish Housing Charter, and we report on our evidence and activities every year under that particular outcome. Thanks, Kev. So why do we need TRP? I think some of you could answer that better than me. So it is an essential part of what we do, and it is a way how we share our ideas and work together. We want you to be involved in our decision making because it helps shape our services, and it's on things that matter to you. So that's why we need to hear from you. Next slide, please, Kev. So just a little bit of mention, we can't go too far without mentioning the dreaded COVID-19. So our face-to-face meetings and events, you'll know that some of them weren't feasible. In fact, for 6 or 7 months, our staff were redeployed doing other things, trying to help with the COVID effort. But we know that some of you will comment probably on this, that some of you felt that you faced exclusion, particularly the digital exclusion, that you'd be forgotten about. We wanted to make sure, particularly in the in the times of lockdown, as we were easing out of lockdown, that we kept in touch with you all. So we became great letter writers, great phone callers, pen pals with a lot of you. And we know that there was a lot of anxiety, and we've heard that from some of you about, you felt that perhaps tenant participation had gone away, but it hadn't. As far as we're concerned, we were still keeping in touch with you, but using different methods. So as well as the Teams meetings that we all rely and know so well now, we helped people with digital skills, i.e. the internet, getting online, all the modern stuff. I know some of you have benefited greatly from that, and we're really pleased to see you here as a result of that today. And we continued with our phone calls, texts and letters. So it was the how are you stuff. We just checked in with people. We also had meetings. I've sat on many a bench in a park with masks on and scarves on, because some of it was February, talking to people and making sure they remembered that we're there for them and we know who they are. Thanks very much. Kev, if you could get the next slide. So our menu of opportunities, we've adapted this slightly because of COVID, COVID-19 and various other things, and also for our new ways of working, which some is online, but some is not online. Some of it is blended, that hybrid we were talking about earlier. So the menu, as we call it, we try to tell everyone about this, because you don't have to be at a meeting like this if you don't want to. You can send us an email with a question, as people have done. You don't have to come out on be a part of a working group. You don't have to know lots of stuff. We will help you take part in any level and any place you want to go to, any type of interaction. So we've got the light touch, we've got take an interest and the get involved. A lot of you guys are all of those things, but we look at how people want to be involved, and we try to make it as pleasant and as painless as possible. And hopefully we're listening to how you would like to be involved. So all those things listed on there are the ways we get in touch with people and how they get in touch with us, more importantly. Next one, Kev. So just to say that in the past year and the coming year, participation will be slightly different as well. We're going to look at more what we call micro events, more local events in places where people live, rather than you have to travel extensively. We don't know what the COVID-19 effects will be, or what fuel shortages, God knows what's next. So we're going to be setting up lots of smaller events, similar to this event. Perhaps we've got people online, but in a room, maybe in a sheltered accommodation, where we've got other people in the room as well that can't possibly travel too far. So we're talking about the 20-minute rule, which I think some of you would have heard at the TIS conference. The national thing is about you don't have to travel more than 20 minutes to get to something, to find out something. But I don't think in rural Perthshire that's quite, unless you have a helicopter or a jet, that is not quite what we can do. But we're working on that as close as possible to where you are. We're adding to the welcome pack. We want to make sure that when people become tenants for the first time, that they know about tenant participation, and that we don't just sort of find them on the street, or they come along to a meeting and they discover it after they become a tenant. So we're adding to that and making sure that people have opportunities to start looking at what goes on in their area, start looking at our working groups, seeing what opportunities there are on the menu, but also what's going on locally. Sometimes you wouldn't necessarily be involved in a working group, perhaps it's outside your interests or outside your area, but we might be able to set something up. And we're also revising our tenant strategy for the next 3 years, starting from 2022. We've learned a lot from the COVID-19 and how to participate a bit more, perhaps interactively, with people who aren't necessarily going to turn up at a meeting, who aren't necessarily online. That's why I've got Gerald here on the phone, because people don't have to do these things in order to be connected to by us. So we're trying lots of different ways. Thank you, Kev. Next slide. So these are some of the opportunities that we've mentioned and in passing. So the top one, we talked about Housing 2040. Lynn mentioned it earlier. Thank you for that, Lynn. And we've been looking at it in all our housing strategy, and we've all been looking at it through how we change our work. my colleagues in the TRP team won't mind me saying they've been writing essays on it for their current studying that they're doing, because they're all becoming very cleverer at the minute. They're going through various studies, and this is a very important part of what we're deciding to do in the future and how we interact with you. In particular, if I may say, the Tenant Climate Change Panel, I don't know if it's a challenge, Diana. We might change it to challenge. What do you think? Whatever we want to say it. Perhaps it's up to the panel to decide what it's called.
Sorry, could I just come in a second about housing to 2040? Sorry, Judy, could you mute yourself so I don't get that echo? Thank you. Sorry, Lynn said there about the Tenant Information Service has just held their first online conference. The last days today. It's been very interesting actually to attend. One of the speakers was Shona Robinson, who was talking about housing to 2040. And as Judy says, it just so happens that myself and my colleagues are actually doing a qualification at the minute, and part of this is about housing to 2040. Very interesting times ahead for tenants and anyone who rents across Scotland. We also heard an interesting speaker, Alan Miller from Strathclyde University, who was talking about housing as a human right. And some new legislation, groundbreaking legislation that's coming in from the UN treaties. So again, what's been said today is about availability, affordability. Housing's more than a roof over your head. Central for health and well-being. And what the pandemic has shown us is there's a lot of inequalities out there around housing. We were told by the NHS to stay home. That's fine if you have a nice home, a warm home, you've got green space to access. A lot of issues are now coming out with with the pandemic, and what Claire was saying earlier about the local housing strategy and how we're going to be reviewing that moving forward, looking at probably a person-centred approach and aligning housing and health more so than normal with the health and social care partnership. So there will be a lot more partnership working moving forward. Interesting times, as we said. Fuel poverty targets, achieving those as well. We are talking of climate change, as Judy said, is the big buzzword at the moment. If unless you're living in an underground, you've seen all the things about climate challenge and about the protesters on the M25. We've got COP26 happening in Glasgow. Boris, they're all going to be here very soon. Yeah, very interesting times ahead, and certainly I'm interested and very excited about the climate challenge champions and climate challenge panel, and learning about what's happening, because it affects all of us, regardless of whether you're in a council property, private rented sector, own a property, mortgage, etc. So yeah, as I said, the conference that Lynn and I have been at was very interesting, and it's good to get different perspectives. So I will keep quiet now. So I'll pass you on to Judy.
Splendid, Diana. I couldn't have a better sidekick. Thank you for doing that. That is one of the reasons why we wanted to set this group up. And the challenge change, whatever we want to call it, it's not a challenge, it's an opportunity, remember. We've already got a lot of interest from various people, some people that have not been interested in other working groups. And that's how it works with our working groups. We look at the specialisms, we look at what people need or what matters to them in their lives. And that's how we've mailed it into the tenant and resident participation. So the ideas that we'd like people in that panel to come up with is over the 2040 type of strategies and the way that's written, but also in their own lives. And fuel poverty does obviously come into, and especially lately, it'll be things like how we communicate, little ways of saving money in energy. It's about how we communicate, how people can change their behaviours. We're all recycling now. I don't know about you lot, but if I so much as drop the plastic bottle in the wrong litter bin, I feel like I'm going to be struck down by lightning. So it goes on that we've all learned how to do these things, and we can carry on doing that. So we'll start this panel up and we will do some training for them. We'll take them on study visits. We'll have a look at the impacts. The Glasgow COP meeting will be fantastic for them to read up on. And we will do a few interesting things for them. So I'm glad we've got the names forward. So we'll start that group, and it'll be working alongside many of our other working groups. It'll probably link into the tenant and resident participation groups. It'll link into the HRA working groups. We've got even the committee report panel. I know you're always recruiting for that, Diana, because there will be various pieces of work that overlap. So we're really excited about having this new group. Talking of which, and Derek's already asked me about this because we discussed this, we're talking about a junior Shore team. Now, guys, I know from the Shore team, they're saying, what name shall we call this other Shore team? It's going to be younger people, and it's about what affects them. So they're the children and teenagers of tenants, and they live and use and work in the area, and they use council services, but they don't normally have a voice. We do it through the schools. So we're going to look at them, and we've got a few people coming forward that want to be part of this junior Shore team. But Derek's put in the chat, of course, the service user review and evaluation team is the, if you like, I can call you a grown-up team, Derek, because you certainly are grown-ups, all of you. And you've done 9 reports after 7 years. Well, the junior team, younger team, whatever they decide to call themselves, will work alongside the Shore team. And they'll be supported like the Shore team are by independent advisors. And we'll see what they have to say about being young people living and working under the council services. So we're really excited about that. And finally, a little bit on our working groups. We do still continue to have working groups that pop up. All my team here, as all my lovely colleagues, have specialisms. And within those specialisms, we have working groups. And we like having people coming along and learning about what we do and then taking part in the working groups. And we'll support you. You get, under the menu of opportunities, you'll get travel expenses, dependent care. We'll give you lots of training. We do good cake and biscuits. We're allowed to do cake and biscuits. So do contact us if there's anything you're interested in, and we'll give you all the details of the working groups. Diana, you're looking for people for the tenant committee report panels. They're very good. They read all the committee reports relating to housing services and they make their comments. Sometimes that changes the stance. Sometimes we put in some better wording. Many of you, and you know who you all are, have helped us rewrite reports when they've been too wordy or not plain English. And we've not seen that because it was staring at this report. You've helped us with things like sole death and tenancy policies, lots of things you've done for us. So do contact us if you're interested in any of our working groups. Sometimes they're short life ones, sometimes they go on for a long time, but we will always pace it at your pace, meet where you want to meet. We support you to do that. Our specialisms, by the way, and you'll see all my lovely friends and colleagues here. We do homelessness, disabilities, digital exclusion. We work with gypsy travellers. We encourage participation at any level. We get involved in things like making decisions about finances, policies, and we do lots of consultations. So next slide, please, Kev, and that should be the last one. And that's a little owl going, well, did you enjoy that? Was that a hoot? Pardon my pun. So my name's Judy Barrow, and I work for the North locality, and I also do various specialisms, bits and bobs I do, but I work with the gypsy travellers. Diana works for the City locality and works with people with disabilities and is waving at you. Kevin, who's done all this wonderful digital stuff for us today, he does the South locality, he does digital inclusion. And Jan, who's been sitting quietly listening to us all, she does the area of Letham and Tulloch and Hillyland. And she works with people who are experienced or know about homelessness. And that is your tenant and resident participation team. And for me, that is my tenant and resident participation talk for what it was worth. Thank you for staying this long. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judy. Does anyone have any questions for Judy? Or any additional questions about anything we've discussed today? No, I don't see anyone. Oh, Judy's got a thumbs up. I don't know if it's a question or not that's coming in from Gerald.
Lynn's got her hand up as well.
Okay, we'll go to Lynn in the first instance then, please.
Okay, I've tried to speak about an idea to people like Kevin and Judy, and it's to do with groups and digital inclusion, and using a venue and the long-standing term working together. And that working together, in my mind, regarding getting people onto the computer or the laptop, has to be a member of staff from one org, another member of staff from another, say 3 altogether. And when I got into a little bit of difficulties at AK Bell quite a while ago, the CEO at AK Bell said they wanted this to happen, but then if I keep mentioning it, nothing does happen. And I don't really know how else to say it to people like, well, whoever, that to start to organise something with AK Bell, maybe once a month for 2 hours, the tenants get together, either bring in their own computer or on a library computer. And there could be, it's the working together principle is at the heart of it, so that Lead Scotland could be involved, Kevin could be involved, a member of staff from AK Bell involved, that's 3 straight away. And so we do maybe have a tenant forum once a month for 2 hours in a quiet, a fenced off area of AK Bell. And people could then see that although it's still on the computer, they come to somewhere, so they actually sit 2 meters apart with masks on, and they see people they've been seeing for years and years and years in a meeting, you know, and it's a combined effort, say from 3 areas of our community, including orgs which are national, like Lead Scotland or Connecting Scotland. And I have mentioned it, I'm thinking of it like groups, like digital inclusion in groups in a venue big enough so people could sit 2 meters apart. And I think people would respond because there'll always be somebody there on duty to help the ones who are sitting there not understanding their own computer or the library computer or whatever, you know. I think and the part of it is the principle working together. Right.
Okay.
So good working together has to happen. So if you say, well, aren't you doing partnership building? Well, we use that term as well, don't we? So people come together. They used to anyway. But this regarding digital inclusion, we get the appropriate orgs to set it up in a suitable premises. And not the Salutation Hotel, because there's no windows in that big room to open to get the fresh air in, you know. So that's why AK Bell is probably the best. And then you could say, once it's all over, after only 2 hours, once a month, you could say, oh, this is working together, because it'd be a member of staff from Lead Scotland, a member of staff from the library, and a member of staff from the council. And we all came together with, say, 10 tenants, all 2 meters apart. And that's what I've been trying to speak about. And I have done 2 or 3 times in the last year, I think, a year or so, or since COVID. Yes, okay.
Okay, thanks. So I'm going to hand over to, I think Kevin had his hand up first, and then Judy.
Takes a long time to talk about it.
Okay. Yeah, I've spoke with Lynn, and Lynn suggested something like the learning curve when you first go into the library might be a nice spot for that, but we're still not there with digital inclusion. I'm now allowed to go into the library and work one-to-one with a tenant where I sit at the far end of a desk, and they're aware that there might be raised voices a little bit where I'm saying, no, you need to press the button above that. Yeah, that's what I mean by that, or whatever. So I can do digital inclusion one-to-one, and the library's behind that, although it took a letter from Lynn to the chief executive of the library's services to get us to there, which I'm grateful for. But yeah, so that's all we're allowed at the library just now, but things are progressing, and hopefully at some point we'll be able to do things along the lines of you saying, Lynn. But there's been a couple of issues other than COVID. Leeds Scotland, Amory, who worked for them and worked closely with us, left the job, and we've had to help Leeds Scotland to do interviews last week to get somebody else in place, and we've hopefully got someone coming in a wee while. So I'd be able to start working with them again. But at the moment they're just kind of covering the bare minimum locally. And one issue, just from my point of view of digital inclusion, is When I work in groups, when I've done little bits of work in groups previous to COVID, a lot of people didn't get much benefit out of it because they're all coming with different devices and they're at different levels and they want to learn different things. And I've found it really tough to run groups. And I have done it. I did it in Letham at the community hub there. And I had the first hour would be on a specific subject, and then I'd have an hour afterwards where it was a drop-in, and nobody came to the first hour because they thought they would hold other people up if they were interested or they had a specific they want to know. But at the second hour, it was a drop-in. I had a queue of people wanting to see me can you tell me what this means on my phone? Can you tell me how I log into this now on my iPad and stuff? And that worked better. So it's pretty much one-to-one worked better, but it's maybe providing it on a less formal basis than which I did pre-COVID, whereas I'd go and sit in somebody's house for an hour and a half for them on a weekly basis. It's maybe having drop-in sessions across the locality where people can come and see me and say, look, I've got this issue this week. Generally, I don't have an issue, so I don't need to work with you too often, but could you help me with this? Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, that's great, Kevin. Thank you. Judy, I think you wanted to come in about the digital inclusion project, maybe?
Yes, I did. Thank you very much, Michelle. As Kevin said, we've been working with Lead to help them recruit their Marie's replacement. So it's quite nice to know that's going to happen. We're also working as the TRP team and yourself, Michelle, as you know, to set up what we call a phased digital inclusion project, where between the likes of Lead and ourselves, we'll have a third party, another group of people doing what we call phased one digital inclusion for people who, thank you, Lynn. Lynn's giving me applause, to stick with the phase one people and always therefore help them to get online, to deal with things, to a longer lead in, if you like. And it's also to help them know about what services we've got and what financial help they can get. So it's more tailored. And we're working very hard on that, getting the procurement of that. It's taken ages because there's been changes in procurement rules. And we've had to really sort of pick our way through, dare I say, Brexit guidelines. But anyway, we won't talk about that. And we're finally at the point where we'll be able to recruit a third party organisation to come in. This is part of your votes last year under option 2. And that will be concentrating on digital inclusion, even for people that have been using computers for a long time, still want some more help. Kev's there to keep the people refreshed, and he can work one-to-one with people and do smaller groups. One of the things, Lynn, you mentioned about, we always wanted to have small cohorts of tenants meeting up, and that's what I meant in one of my slides about micro meetings. And we want this digital inclusion project that we're going to be developing to concentrate on that. By the way, we are doing coffee mornings. Each of the localities are doing small coffee mornings for drop-ins. We do take people who are not very good at digital inclusion but are able to get on the coffee morning. We help them with whatever queries they have. So we are listening to all the different levels. It's like the menu of opportunities. There's different levels of digital skills. There's different levels of digital interest. You know, some people don't want to go on and build a massive spreadsheet on something. They just want to be able to talk to their uncle in Australia, that sort of thing. So we are working on that. So Lynn, yeah, we're taking everything you've said, and the venue is very important to us, and we are looking at maybe sheltered accommodation, lounges, and some of the places where we'll be able to safely meet maybe a handful of people. But we've got to put it right down to small groups of people safely met. We can't do the big meeting rooms at the moment, which is why we're all talking online at the moment. So we'll keep you involved in that, Lynn.
That's great, thank you, Judy.
And also, sorry, I've got a question from Gerald. That's why I was on the phone. Well, it was more of a statement. Gerald, keep me right if I'm getting this wrong. And Derek and Gerald go to regional meetings where tenant and resident participation is discussed, and where the national guidance is often discussed. For the Scottish Government have done national guidance on tenant participation and how important it is. So what Gerald just mentioned is that he and Derek go to these meetings, so perhaps we could set up a wee working group where they could feed back what the region are saying, the representative region. Derek, would you agree that that would be a nice thing for us to do? We could probably pop it into a forum, the next forum we have, or we could send out a newsletter. So I'll leave Derek and Gerald to think about that.
That's great. Thank you, Judy. Are there any other questions? Not missed anyone with a hand up, no? Okay, thank you very much. I'm just going to hand over to Claire now to bring the conference to a close. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. And thank you to everybody. It's been really great to see you all, and I think this has gone really well. I think there's been loads of great discussion and some really good questions, and I think, you know, really give an indication, I think, of many of you here in terms of your knowledge and understanding. I think in terms of, you know, some of the real difficult strategic but also frontline operational issues that you're facing as tenants and that we are. So lots of really great rich information for us to take forward and give consideration to as we start to sort of, I think, look to next year for some of our sort of key priorities. So great to see you all. Thank you very much for all of your input, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Kev, could we stop recording?
I'm just doing that.
Lovely, thank you.